This video contains spoilers for Joker 2. Don't watch if you care.
It's like a perfect little self-contained bubble of a movie, and regardless of how the second one turns out, I think the first one is just that good that I don't think the second one can really ruin it.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I need to apologize. Joker Folie à Deux is directed by Todd Phillips and is the sequel to the 2019 smash hit starring Joaquin Phoenix. And going into this sequel, I honestly had no clue what to expect. On the one hand, I really liked the first one, and while I wasn't exactly demanding a follow-up, this world and this take on the character leaves a lot of potential to be explored. On the other hand, the early reactions were shockingly negative, which puzzled me as to how they could have possibly screwed it up. I mean, the trailers looked pretty solid, so how bad could it be? The fact that I'm asking means you already know the answer. I will say it's probably not as bad as people are making it out to be, and there are aspects that I do like about it, but compared to the first one, this is a colossal disappointment. Real quickly going over the positives, some of the strong elements from the first are thankfully carried over into this movie. The look of the film stays consistent with the grim, depressing, dilapidated look of Gotham from the first movie. The cinematography is pretty solid and the color is very dynamic. The cast is easily the strongest part. Despite the lackluster script, Joaquin Phoenix is still just as good as he was in the first. He doesn't hold the same unnerving presence, but he does remain pretty funny and intense. Of course, this movie sees the intro of Harley Quinn, or Lee, played by Lady Gaga, and she does a fine job. She works well off of Phoenix, and she is of course great in the musical sequences. Speaking of, as you probably know, this movie is a musical. An out-of-the-box concept to be sure, but an interesting one if done well. And it was done alright. It's essentially a jukebox musical where the characters sing pre-existing songs that are meant to convey what they're feeling. Some are more awkward than others, but for the most part, they were just kind of there. I do kind of wish this movie wrote original songs and went the proper musical route, but it was perfectly fine. In fact, this was one of the most perfectly fine movies of the year, until you start to break down the story, and particularly by the time you get to the ending. Once again, to express my frustration would require spoiling the movie, so this is your last chance to dip out if you want to see it. So a big part of this movie's story is the trial of Arthur Fleck. And one of the questions that gets raised in his defense is whether it was Arthur that killed all those people or the Joker, basically establishing them as two separate identities and absolving Arthur of any responsibilities. Now, in terms of the underlying message of how the legal system overlooks mental health when building a legit case, this isn't that bad. But in terms of Arthur's arc, it kind of undoes a lot of his development from the first movie. The first movie ended with him being unapologetically Joker. He's free from the oppression society puts on him, and is an inspiration to people who are fed up with the system as well. But here, he reverts back to timid Arthur and decides he doesn't want to be Joker anymore. And he only snaps back into it because of Lady Gaga's insane clown pussy. Throughout the trial, there are people egging him on who believe Joker is a hero, and for a while, he lets that fuel him in his testimony. Then he immediately jumps back to deciding that there is no Joker, and that he's just some sad mental patient who did a bad thing. It feels very much like character whiplash. The relationship that forms between him and Harley is also very awkward and forced. She just kind of decides she's crazy and pigeonholes her way into his life because she thinks he's some accomplished hero. And of course he goes along with it because Lady Gaga thinks he's cool and handsome. It's a very hasty, surface level romance that ends just as awkwardly as it begins. Typically with Joker and Harley, there is some level of toxicity and manipulation in their relationship, and there kind of is here, but it's not well executed. I don't know if there were scenes cut or rewritten or what, but it was just really clunky. There's a plot point involving a pregnancy that goes nowhere. They bring in Harvey Dent as the most weak sauce introduction of Two-Face in Batman history. And overall, it was a very boring, uneventful movie. And then we get to the ending, where just about all remaining good faith I had in this movie went straight out the window. So after Harley breaks up with Arthur, he ends up back in the asylum. Then, when he's walking to see a visitor, a random inmate walks up to Arthur, tells him a joke, and then stabs him to death. As Arthur is dying on the floor, you can see the crazy inmate in the background laughing hysterically as he slices into his mouth. heavily implying that this is meant to be Heath Ledger's Joker from the Dark Knight trilogy. Okay, outside of just being a very anticlimactic way to end both this movie and Joker as a character being taken out by some nameless extra, it also undermines the previous movie really badly. See, we haven't actually been watching this Joker's origin story. We've been watching the origin story of a completely different Joker. Arthur Fleck never mattered. He was just the catalyst for a completely different character's creation. When the guy in the clown mask shot Bruce Wayne's parents in the first movie, he didn't proclaim himself to be Jack Napier, and it worked as a way to show Joker's impact while permanently linking him and Batman. Here, it's just cheap fan service that actually does ruin the first movie. To sum up, I feel like there are things to enjoy about Joker 2 so long as you divorce it from the first movie. It has some decent ideas, really well done visuals, and a great cast. It just well and truly fumbled the story and didn't do enough to justify its own existence. Is this the worst movie of the year? No, because it's not Madam Web or Mean Girls, but it is a pretty devastating disappointment. I'd give it a 2.5 out of 5.